clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Here.
Mrs. Rich?
Here.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Kravchuk?
Here.
Mr. Parzak?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
The meeting is now open. Adequate notice of the meeting was provided by posting a copy of the time and place on the municipal clerk's bulletin board and mailing a copy of same to the press and the Cape May County Herald on January 6, 2018. Will everyone please rise to salute the flag? Before we get started, we've got some gentlemen from the American Legion Post 331. We'd just like to have a minute of our time. One gentleman.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom McCall. I'm the commander of the American Legion Post 331 here in Stone Harbor. I'm joined tonight by our first vice commander, Joe Stanger, and our past commander, Jim Fleischman. The members of the American Legion Post would like to continue our tradition that we started a couple years ago in saying thank you to the mayor and the council, all your departments, and all your loyal employees for the help and support that they give to us throughout the course of the year. We're a volunteer group, getting older. The case in point is Memorial Day. And right, watch it tell you, we start 4 o'clock in the morning, we visit the graves. We have three ceremonies from 9 a.m. till 12:30. And without the help of the communities on 7 Mile Island, we would be lost. So it starts with the mayor and the leadership. I'm here to say thank you to everyone sitting up there. Your departments, your police, fire, public works, administration cannot do enough to assist us in a time of need or a minor request. Whenever we approach your employees and your department heads, no one ever rolls their eyes and says, oh, they're here again. They need something else. It's what can we do for you? How can we help you? And how soon we can get it done for you. So with that said, we appreciate the rapport that we have with the community and with mayor and council and all your excellent, excellent employees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time out to be here tonight.
And I would like to say thank you to you all. You've set a great example.
Do we have any communications?
No, Mayor.
At this time, we'll have public comment. Anybody wishing to address mayor and council may do so at this time by coming forward to the microphone and stating your name and address for the record.
I love the zoning law in Stone Harbor. The zoning law in Stone Harbor is Stone Harbor's crown and glory. You know, the barrier islands up and down south of Atlantic City, they're really all the same. They have beautiful white sand and
Thank you, Bonnie. Is there anyone else who would like to address mayor and council? Seeing no one, I'll close public comment. Ordinance 1536.
Yes, I'd like to introduce a motion for ordinance 1536 to be taken up for the second reading.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Will the clerk read the title only of ordinance 1536 on second reading?
An ordinance amending Ordinance 1524 pertaining to environmentally acceptable packaging and product.
The public hearing on ordinance 1536 is open. The public hearing is closed.
I'd like to move that ordinance 1536 be passed on the second reading and advance to third and final reading.
Second.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Will the clerk read the title only of ordinance 1536 on third and final reading?
An ordinance amending Ordinance 1524 pertaining to environmentally acceptable packaging and product.
I'd like to move that ordinance 1536 be passed on third and final reading and adopted and published according to law.
Second.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Ordinance 1537.
Madam Mayor, I move that ordinance 1537 be taken up on second reading.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Will the clerk read the title only of ordinance 1537 on second reading?
An ordinance establishing and fixing salary ranges for certain positions within the Borough of Stone Harbor.
And
The-
may I just, the key word was certain positions, so it's only those three.
At what point do we have discussion, Mr. Solicitor?
I didn't vote yet.
Now, after the public hearing, before I open to the public?
I would suggest that you open to the public and then you have your discussion.
So I'll get back to you, Joan.
Thank you.
The public hearing on ordinance 1537 is open. Public hearing is closed.
My question is, I see three on there. The Rec Director, Tourism Special Events Director, and Tax Collector, Deputy Assistant Tax Collector. They're the three changes?
Yes, sorry.
Three.
Yes.
And this only applies to that, and then we will have our closed session in 2 weeks and go over the other salaries, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any discussion?
Madam Mayor, I move that ordinance 1537 be passed on second reading and advance to third and final reading.
Second?
Clerk, call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Will the clerk read the title only of ordinance 1537 on third and final reading?
An ordinance establishing and fixing salary ranges for certain positions within the Borough of Stone Harbor.
Madam Mayor, I move that ordinance 1537 be passed on third and final reading, adopted and published according to law.
Second.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Resolution 2018 S-210.
Mayor and council, I offer resolution 2018-S-2010, or I'm sorry, 210 for adoption.
Second.
This is a refund of maintenance and performance surety bonds to builders.
Any discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Resolution 2018 S-211.
Mayor and council, I offer resolution 2018-S-211 for adoption.
Second.
This is, as before, this is a refund for maintenance and surety bonds to certain builders.
Any discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Resolution 2018 S-212.
Madam Mayor, I offer resolution 2018-S-212 for adoption.
Second.
This is a refund of a duplicate tax payment which was made for the property located at 11810 Third Avenue.
Any discussion? Clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
yes,
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Resolution 2018 S-213.
I offer Resolution 2018 S-213 for adoption.
Second?
This is a transfer of funds from the two line items, gasoline, general expense, and the Cape May County MUA, to electricity.
Any discussion? Clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
yes,
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Resolution 2018 S-214.
I'd like to offer 2018 S-214 for adoption.
second,
This is what we talked about at the last meeting. This is to approve the revised dune vegetation management application process.
Any discussion? Clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
yes,
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Resolution 2018 S-215.
I'd like to offer 2018 S-215 for adoption.
second,
This is to approve conditions for the individuals from 115th Street to 118th Street that this will affect the dune management plan and make it much cleaner as to how we're going to do maintenance pruning.
Any discussion? Clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
yes,
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
I have no items of discussion on the agenda. May I have a motion approving the bills?
I'd like to make a motion that approve the bills, the bill list, and the CEO to pay the bills when the funds are available and the vouchers are properly endorsed.
Second.
All those in favor?
aye,
Opposed? At this time, we're about to consider a resolution to go into private session. We would appreciate if you would all remain seated until the resolution has been acted upon. At the conclusion of the private session, we will come back in the public session for the purpose of either taking action as a result of our discussion in private session or to simply adjourn. It's also possible that someone might bring up some other item of business in public session after we come back from private session. Resolution 2018 S-216.
Madam Mayor, I offer Resolution 2018 S-16 for adoption.
second,
Clerk call the roll.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Rich?
Yes.
Mrs. Gallagher? Yes. Mr. Kraftcheck?
Yes.
Mr. Parzak?
yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
And for the record, we're going into closed session for a matter related to the purchase, lease, sale, or acquisition of real property with public funds.